So you want to get better at Shiv. Chivalry 2 seems like a simple kind of game to play. You just hit left click, swing around your sword, hold right click to block. It all seems pretty straightforward. But in reality, Chivalry 2 has many little nuances that make the game somewhat complicated. And for a new player coming into the game, it could be a lot of information all at once. So what I want to do today is just go over a couple things that will hopefully improve your gameplay substantially with the least amount of effort involved for you guys. Kind of like a little quick tips video where I go over some basic combat stuff. Today we're going to talk about stamina, we're going to talk about some of the different classes and weapons that I think are beginner friendly. We're going to talk about blocking, or what it's actually known as is parry, riposte, and counter as well, go hand in hand. We're going to talk about dodging, and we're going to be going over some combat related things like excels and drags, and whatever else I can think of, okay? So sit down, grab your notepad and pencil, it's time to take notes, kids. Let's start off with first person versus third person. Now, first person looks much nicer. I mean, you feel more immersed, the weapons look better, you may even have a better sense of the reach of your weapon if you're new. Or you might be coming from a similar game like Mordhau and you're just used to first person. And you would be right in saying these things. I mean, first person does look, feel better. It is the way to play if you want to be immersed. But third person offers you a wider range of view. You can see when people are flanking you most of the time. I find third person much easier to read. And when I play in first, I feel more claustrophobic. Now, I have to say really quick, when I first started playing Shiv, I was a first person guy 100% all the way. And as soon as I switched to third person, holy shit, that's when things took a turn for me. Chivalry 2 is meant to be played in third person, I'm pretty sure. Unless you want to be handicapped and play in first, I highly recommend playing in third person. Give it a couple hours. You're probably going to hate your life for those couple hours, but when it clicks with you, you're going to realize that first person is just not for you anymore. There you go. Tip number 1, play in third person. Stamina in Chivalry 2 is really important. You have to constantly watch on the bottom left at that yellow bar and make sure you don't lose your stamina. If you do, you'll become disarmed. I'll show you what that looks like. I'll just drain my stamina quick by holding right click, and it's one of the biggest noob mistakes you can make. So every time you block from an attack, it drains your stamina as well. And when you're disarmed, you're done. Keep in mind that jumping drains your stamina quite a bit. Chaining attack, so comboing by spamming left click or spamming the same attack over and over again will drain your stamina. Heavy attacks will drain your stamina. Crouching will prevent your stamina from regenning. Even throwing your weapon will cost quite a bit of stamina. But the best tip I can give you guys for preserving your stamina is learning how to counter. And what countering means is that you're going to block and you're going to put out the same attack that an enemy is throwing out at you. So if an enemy is doing a slash attack at me, I'm going to be holding block, and before his slash can hit my block, I'm going to do the same attack. And that will result in a counter. What a counter does is that it refunds the stamina that you've spent on the block. It allows you to throw out slash at the opponent quicker than when you would normally just attack and then he would block. And if you practice this, you can just walk up to people and practice this. You can just practice counters over and over again until they run out of stamina. Countering also does something, it gives you a buff called active parry, and what that means is basically in that split second that your swing is coming out from your counter, active parry will occur, and that means that, let's say there's someone to your left and to your right, and they both attack at your front while this is happening. Your character won't get hit, like their swords will just bounce off you. So in short, counters, they refund the stamina that you've wasted on the block. Your attack comes out quicker and will likely hurt your enemy. And if active parry decides to be working in that moment, because let's all be honest, this mechanic doesn't work all the time, there's bugs in the game still, then you will stop oncoming attacks briefly, like for like a millisecond, okay? Now the difference between a counter and a riposte or riposte isn't very much. But basically, it's just like a counter, except you're not matching the opponent's attack. So if the opponent is slashing and you're holding block, and you try to do a counter but with an overhead instead of matching their slash, the game will say riposte. Your attack will come out a little bit quicker than what a counter would. You won't even notice the difference, honestly. And the main difference being that you won't get refunded that stamina that you lost during the block. Next thing we're going to talk about is feints. Feints are simply showing one attack and then morphing into another attack. So I could do a stab into an overhead, I could do a slash into an overhead, I could do an overhead into a stab. I could even do an overhead into another overhead, or I could do slash into another slash. This will trick your opponents into thinking that you're doing one attack when in fact you're doing another. This also throws off your opponent's blocking because they're anticipating the slash to come out, for example, but it takes a little bit longer because you're switching to an overhead. You can do any combination of feints you can think of, but you can only do 2 moves. So you could do slash to overhead, you could do slash to stab, you could even do slash to an alternate slash. There's no key binding for feint. You just have to start an attack, and before you commit to your attack, you switch to a different attack. Every attack has a point of no return. You can almost every time identify it by your character making a shouting noise. So your feints can be really quick, like the slash to overhead almost immediately. That won't really trick your opponent, but you could, if you time it right, you could feint last second and create a large gap in your trickery. Some really common, really effective feints are slash to overhead, overhead to slash, overhead to alternative overhead, stab to overhead, stab to alternate stab. Also keep in mind that feints will drain your stamina. Not too much, so you can use them fairly liberally. Now, you can feint into a heavy attack, for example, slash into an overhead heavy, but you can't go from a heavy into a normal attack. This often works best against opponents when you're doing 2 of the same attack, so for example, overhead to overhead heavy. It throws off the timing. Even if they can recognize that you're doing 2 overheads, you're feinting into another overhead, they'll be thrown off by the time it takes for that heavy to charge up. Let's talk about drags quick, because they're pretty useful, and once you get the hang of them, you'll be doing them without even knowing you're doing them. Now, a drag is dragging your sword around with your attack or against your attack. So if you wanted to accelerate your attack, you would move with the swing of your weapon. So we'll do a slash, and the swing is going from right to left, so let's follow that. That's an accel. If you wanted to de-accelerate your attack, you would go the opposite way of the swing. So again, it's swinging from right to left, and we're going to go the opposite way. So we're going to turn our mouse to the right. And what that's going to do is either make our sword hit the opponent quicker or make our sword hit the opponent slower. And what our opponent sees is just us swinging. So they're trying to gauge when they're going to have to parry us, and we're trying to throw them off by either making it really quick or making it a little bit slower. Okay. Now you can accel your slash by looking left or right, depending on which way you're swinging, and you can accel overheads by looking straight to the ground. To accelerate in a stab, you just want to move towards your target, but that's not as effective if dragging your sword left or right doing a slash. Let's see what this looks like in practice. Really effective if you charge up a heavy and you accel your attack, because you hit your target almost immediately. Overhead, accel. Let's do it in first person to give you a better idea how it looks. Now you could also de-accelerate your attacks as well. Like in overhead you would look up, and your slash you would look away from your attack. But for the most part, you just want to practice your accelerations, your accels. This is a huge game changer when you're doing overheads as well. You can also increase the acceleration on an overhead by ducking as well as looking at the ground. Eventually, once you get the hang of these two, you're just going to be doing it naturally. You'll be excelling your attacks and de-excelling your attacks during a fight. You won't even notice that you're doing it. But once you are aware that you are doing it, you'll notice your gameplay improving. You'll be winning more fights. Okay guys, almost done. Last but not least, let's go over the class system super quick just so you guys can understand it, and then I'll give you guys some recommendations on some classes to try out. So on the bottom here, you got the 4 main classes: Archer, Vanguard, Footman, and Knight. Each class has 3 subclasses, and each subclass has different attributes. You can see here on the top right, Skirmisher has different attributes than, let's say, the Longbowman or the Crossbowman. Another thing to keep in mind when choosing a class on the top right is how much health they have, their movement speed, and their stamina. So the archer class being some of the weakest classes in the game, health-wise, and the knights being some of the strongest. They almost have double the health of an archer. If you liked range combat, I highly suggest the crossbow. I think it's the meta for the archer class. And my personal favorite is javelin. Your aim has to be a little bit better. The javelin guy's the subclass is called skirmisher, and he gets a little boost in his stamina compared to his other archer counterparts. He also spawns with a little buckler, which I like, and the axe is, in my opinion, one of the best secondary weapons in the game. Just a side note, stay away from the throwing axes. They don't do as much damage, and their reach doesn't seem like a lot's missing on reach there, but trust me, there's like a huge arc to their shot. Javelin's where you want to be. On Vanguard, if you're gonna play Vanguards, try and stick with the Devastator class. They have a huge special attack, and your guy will leap forward doing tremendous damage. You'll one-shot archers, you'll one-shot a lot of the Vanguards and footmen. The special's really, really strong. The Raider's also fairly good, just because he gets 2 Danaxes, and you can only get the Danax on this class, and it's like a really short, fast, two-handed weapon with a phenomenal throw. If you throw this Danax and you hit someone in the head, they're done. The Ambusher is kind of like the meme class of this game. It does 50% bonus damage from behind when using the weapons you spawn with, and the dagger is really, really a strong 1v1 weapon. But the class is kind of a joke, and no one really plays it seriously, but it's fun. If you like to have fun like I do, give it a shot. Footman is really strong. The halberd, by far one of the best weapons in the game, and the spear, the two-handed spear, really, really strong. I think it's an S tier weapon, the spear, even though I'm not the greatest with it. And the pole hammer just deletes knights. Its special attack is like this giant overhead that will one-shot armored units. And for its secondary, you can, pick the hatchet or short sword, whatever you prefer. Short sword's much faster, but a lot less damage. And the hatchet is a lot stronger, but a lot shorter as well. If you like playing engineer as well, you can help your team out by blocking off some of the objectives with these barricades and spike traps, even though the spike traps are kind of trash. These are all 3 great, really good blunt weapons. The pickaxe is really fast. The shovel bonks everybody, and the sledgehammer is like a really quick two-handed mace. And for the knight, for beginners, I think out of all these classes, I think if you're starting the game, I think you should pick the Guardian on Knight. He starts with this big heavy shield, which will reduce a lot of the stamina loss when blocking enemy attacks, and you still don't really have your canners down and your riposte down. This class is really good just for that shield alone. And the Warhammer, my god, it's like this thing, it just got nerfed too on June 12th as well, and it still hits like a truck. Like, it's a serious weapon. Its overheads are really quick, especially when you crouch like I showed you. It being a blunt weapon, when it makes contact, it won't cleave through multiple enemies. But if you do a heavy attack with a Warhammer and you get through some people's parries, my god, like it's such a devastating weapon. And its secondary, honestly, it doesn't really matter what you pick because you're going to be using that Warhammer so much. It's just, the Guardian used to be like a really weak class, but now it's, since the blunt buffs that we've gotten in the past few months, the Guardian is one of the strongest classes in the game, and I can't explain enough that beginners should try this class. Also on Knight, I think if you're trying to get into two-handed weapons and you're having a hard time, I think the longsword is a really good choice to start off with. It has the speed of like a one-handed weapon. It's really quick, but it kind of lacks in damage. I mean, I think it's slashed as 50 or something, or 60. It's not a very good damage weapon. You're not going to be one-shotting a lot of people. But if you start feigning and understanding that you're going to be out swinging a lot of people, the longsword is really, really good. And it also has the one-handed axe, which is, like I said, it's kind of like the sword. It's really quick and not as long as the sword, but it hits so hard and it cleaves through enemies. The one-handed axe is so good. You could even play the Guardian class, by the way, with an axe, if you don't like the blunt weapon stopping on contact with your opponents. But the Warhammer, my god, is so good. Anyways, longsword under officer, Guardian with the Warhammer. Under Vanguard, you should try this one, the Raider with the 2 Danaxes. And if you're playing archer, crossbowman, and if you want something a little more difficult and more rewarding, try the javelin. And if you're playing footman, please try the halberd out. You will not be disappointed. Thanks so much for watching, guys. These tips will definitely improve your gameplay. You'll almost see it overnight, or once you start getting a grasp on the things I told you. Just make sure to watch your stamina, start experimenting with feints and drags to accelerate those attacks. There's lots more I can go over, like positioning, how the different weapons interact with different opponents and classes, but I'll get to that in the next video. I'll see how this video was received. If you guys want more Chivalry 2 content, I make as much as I can. I am in love with this game to death. Please throw the video a like, check out some of my other videos, and of course, subscribe.